Captain Captain Janeway may be the hardest leader I've ranked so far, because in one moment, she can create an incredibly healthy team environment, and then turn around and create an incredibly toxic environment. What is going on here? Let's get into it. One of the things that immediately stood out to me while watching Voyager is that compared to Captain Kirk, Janeway asks far more questions. She's regularly turning to Chakotay and asking, "What do you think?" Or she'll ask, "How so?" She invites people into the discussion, and that matters because questions communicate trust. Leaders who ask questions are saying, "Hey, I can't carry this alone. I need your help." And that's healthy leadership. Compare that to Captain Kirk. Too often, Kirk had a plan, and everyone else found out halfway through executing it or after the plan was done. I mean, Scotty literally says, "I still don't know what we're doing." That almost never happens with Janeway. She gathers information first. She explains the mission. She holds team meetings. That is all very important. And once Janeway makes a decision, she expects her crew to follow. Good teams don't have to agree on every decision. But once the decision is made, everyone needs to be pulling in the same direction. And that's exactly the tension that Chakotay wrestles with. He may disagree. Janeway listens, she considers it, but then she'll say, "I've made my decision. Do I have your support?" She's really asking, can we move forward together? Leadership requires that you make decisions. Consensus isn't always possible. The trick is knowing when discussion ends and execution begins. And overall, Janeway does something that Kirk rarely did. She creates that space for disagreement, and then she makes a decision. That is healthy leadership. But something kept happening that I almost missed. And it wasn't about what Janeway said. It was about what she noticed. She noticed what wasn't being said. And this might actually be one of Janeway's greatest strengths. It's her emotional awareness. There's one scene that really stood out to me. In season 3, episode 26, it's Scorpion Part 1. After a briefing, everyone gets up and leaves except Chakotay. He's quiet. Most leaders would completely miss that, but Janeway doesn't. She simply says, "You're awfully quiet." That's it. 3 words. No assumptions, just an observation. That is excellent leadership because even silence communicates. Sometimes people don't know how to express their thoughts. Sometimes they're testing whether it's safe. Sometimes they're processing. Emotions don't always come with words, and great leaders learn to notice what isn't being said. That's something we saw with Lieutenant Winters in Band of Brothers. It's something we occasionally saw with Picard. Janeway consistently demonstrates it. She names tension, she notices the morale of her crew, she sees emotional shifts before anyone says anything. In season 4, episode 8, Year of Hell Part 1, she's concerned with her crew morale. She isn't just tracking ship systems, she's tracking people, and that's a healthy instinct. Organizations don't fail because machines or systems get tired. They fail because people do. That doesn't mean she's perfect. There's a scene in that same episode, Year of Hell Part 1, and it involves a watch that Chakotay made for her. And she doesn't give any acknowledgement for the effort or the thought behind it. She just says, "It needs to be recycled. We can use these resources elsewhere." For someone normally so emotionally aware, this feels jarring. A simple "thank you, I know what this meant" would have gone a long way. On the whole, she tends to be a pretty aware leader, and awareness only matters if that helps you face reality. Because there's a moment later on where Janeway demonstrates one of the hardest leadership skills there is. She faces reality instead of wishing reality away. In this same episode, Year of Hell Part 1, the ship is falling apart. Resources are dwindling. Everyone's exhausted. And Janeway says, determination alone isn't going to hold this ship together. That right there is something called the Stockdale principle. It's named after Admiral James Stockdale. Now, Stockdale survived years as a prisoner of war during the Vietnam War. And when asked who didn't survive the POW camp, Stockdale gave an unexpected answer. He said it was the optimists. Not because optimism is bad, but because they kept convincing themselves that they'd be released by Thanksgiving, and then Christmas, and then Easter, and then maybe the summer, until they eventually lost hope and died. The survivors weren't pessimists, they were realists. They looked reality squarely in the face, accepted it, and then asked, what do we do now? That is the Stockdale principle. You look reality squarely in the face, you accept the cold, hard facts, and you decide what you're going to do about it. And that is exactly what Janeway is doing here. She doesn't sugarcoat the situation. She doesn't pretend everything will be okay. She accepts reality and then leads her team. And that is excellent leadership. But facing reality creates a different leadership problem, because once you've accepted what's true, someone still has to decide what happens. And here's where Janeway becomes a bit controversial, because once she made a decision, her authority became untouchable. One of the hardest moments in leadership comes after you've listened to everyone. You've gathered all the information, you've heard the objections, you've considered all the alternatives. Now you have to decide. That is the burden of leadership. And to Janeway's credit, she's not afraid of that responsibility. There are several times where she listens carefully, she asks thoughtful questions, she invites disagreement, and then she says, "I've made my decision." And I actually respect that. If every decision required unanimous agreement, nothing would get done. Good leaders create discussion. They also know when discussion has run its course. But there's a fine line between decisive leadership and unquestionable authority. And I think Janeway occasionally crosses that line. In season 4, episode 9, Year of Hell, part 2, when 7 of 9 raises concerns about Janeway's plan, instead of exploring those concerns, Janeway shuts her down. The decision has been made, we're moving forward. And then later, Tuvok reinforces that mindset. He tells Seven that it is inappropriate to contradict the captain. Wait, what? That's almost the exact opposite of what we saw from Captain Picard. Remember season 7, episode 12 of Next Generation, the Pegasus? Picard selected Riker as his commander in part because Riker had previously challenged the captain's decision. Picard wanted someone who would push back, not because disagreement is a lot of fun and he wanted more of it, but because disagreement makes decisions better. And that's the difference. Picard believed authority should invite challenge. Janeway treated authority as the end of the conversation. To be fair, every leader has moments where they simply need people to execute. In a crisis, there's not really time for endless debate. But cultures aren't built during the crisis. They are built by the patterns people experience every day. And if challenging the leader becomes inappropriate, people eventually just stop bringing concerns altogether. And that is when authority becomes dangerous. Not because the leader is malicious, but because nobody feels safe questioning them. And here's why that matters. Teams don't become unhealthy overnight. It starts with one decision that people don't question, then another, and another. And eventually, trust quietly turns into blind acceptance. Trust is essential, don't get me wrong, but blind acceptance is dangerous. One of the themes that kept coming up throughout the Voyager episodes I watched was trust. Janeway trusts her crew trusts her. That is healthy. High-performing teams need trust. But Voyager occasionally crossed into something different, blind acceptance. There's one exchange in particular that really bothered me. We're still season 4, episode 9, Year of Hell. Tuvok says, "My trust in Captain Janeway is absolute." Sounds good, right? He's loyal, he's committed, but then he says, "The captain is always right." No, the captain is not always right. So, Tuvok, you're saying there's no circumstance where you question the captain. That isn't trust. That is blind acceptance. And healthy leadership never asks people to stop thinking. It asks people to think critically. Disasters usually aren't caused because people lacked expertise. They happen because the expertise was not allowed to challenge authority. Either people stayed silent or they were shut down. That is why I make such a big deal about psychological safety. The healthiest teams trust their leaders enough to disagree with them. That's exactly what Picard built. It's what Gene Kranz built. It's what Lieutenant Winters built. And it is what Janeway is struggling to build consistently with her crew. Ironically, the person who pushes back most is Chakotay. Sometimes he disagrees openly. Sometimes he even acts against Janeway's intent. And I don't think that's healthy either. Blind obedience is dangerous, and open rebellion is dangerous. Healthy leadership lives somewhere in the middle. I trust you, I respect you, and I have a responsibility to tell you what I'm seeing. That is the kind of trust every leader should want. Because the goal is not to have followers who always agree with you. The goal is a team who will help you see what you cannot see. And that's exactly why I struggled to rank Janeway, because she demonstrates some really healthy leadership while also making mistakes that keep her from being the best. So where does Captain Janeway land for me? I'd have her on my team. She consistently demonstrates emotional intelligence. She notices what other leaders miss. She asks thoughtful questions. She brings people into the discussion. She genuinely cares about her crew. Those are qualities I look for in leaders. Why is she not higher? Lack of consistency. There are times where her authority becomes difficult to question, moments where trust drifts toward this blind acceptance, times when collaboration just gives way to this command and control leadership, and those moments matter because your team doesn't experience your best leadership. They experience your most consistent leadership. And while Janeway is consistently healthier than Kirk, I don't think she reaches the level of Picard. Picard built a bridge crew that thought independently. Janeway built a crew that thought until she told them to stop thinking. What do you think? Where would you rank her? What did I miss? Are there Voyager episodes you think give us a different perspective on Janeway's leadership? Let me know down in the comments. And coming up next, we are heading over to Runway to see the most successful fashion editor in action. But is Miranda Priestley the most powerful leader, or someone else quietly in control? Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss it. And if there's a TV or movie character that you would like me to analyze, just let me know in the comments. And until next time, take care.